Hi, I'm Roger Berliner, representing District 1 on the Montgomery County Council. Join me for a conversation with Congressman John Delaney on No Boundaries, coming up next.
This No Boundaries travels to Poolesville, Maryland, and Bassett's Restaurant, a popular eating establishment since 1993. Here, Montgomery County Councilmember Roger Berliner met up with US Congressman John Delaney to share interests and perspectives. They began with a look at their respective districts and how they overlap.
You have a big swath of Western Maryland and farmers and suburban Potomac, and I represent from the DC line to the Frederick County line.
Right.
So
right. It's great. It's great to be here with you, Roger. And we do have a lot in common in terms of the overlapping districts. You go a little further in than I do because you touch DC, but I start at the 270 Beltway intersection, so pretty close, and then come out, as you know, out to Frederick, and then go all the way to Western Maryland, all the way out to Deep Creek Lake. So it's a wonderful collection of communities.
it really is.
Yeah.
When I first became representative of the Poolesville community, I know that they were saying, okay, what's the guy from Bethesda?
Right.
Does he understand our needs? And it has been such a blessing for me because you really talk about the farm community and their attachment to the earth and how when you come out here, you breathe differently.
Yes.
These people really are salt of the earth, and they live life differently.
They do. And when you go to these different communities, you realize that they have a lot in common. Like what people worry about is really consistent across communities. The things that they have in common are so much greater than so many people would lead us to believe.
Yes.
That doesn't mean on a day-to-day basis they don't get up and get to work differently or do different things. Some work with their hands, some don't. And you know how the schools are laid out and where they go and shop may be different. But at the end of the day, there's a tremendous common kind of things that bind us together, and that's one of the great privileges about having these diverse districts in the true sense of the word. You realize how much we all have in common. My wife's actually from Idaho. Her dad was a potato farmer, so she's really enjoyed the fact that my district has so many agricultural communities because it kind of brings her back to her roots in many ways.
One of the things I'm most proud about in Montgomery County is that we made this conscious decision to reserve 1/3 of our county for agricultural use in a place that is borders the capital of the world.
Yes.
And how unusual that is and how it speaks to the values of Montgomery County in a way that I am so proud of.
It was a stunningly smart decision, you know, and people already know that, but I think even in the fullness of time, people will look back. And you know where you really notice it the most is when you fly into Dulles Airport. And you look at the Virginia side, and you really see that the kind of suburban development just continues out as far as the eye can see. But when you look at the Maryland side, you almost feel like you're looking at one of those English countryside, all these little kind of quilt work, beautiful little farms. And you're right, it's Montgomery County. Yeah. Right? And it's not very far. People often say to me, you know, I'd like to get a farm, or I'd like to spend some time. I want to take my kids out to do, and they know I represent Western Maryland. And I'm like, well, you know, you actually don't have to go that far.
Come right here.
Yeah. No, it was really an incredible wisdom went into doing this, and we're really, really fortunate.
We really are. I know that you and I both share a passion for the C&O Canal.
Yeah.
I lived for 20-something years immediately adjacent to the canal and would walk out and look at the Potomac River and go, oh my goodness, this could be any place out west.
Yes.
It is beautiful, it is big, it is dramatic, and it could be anywhere. And here it is on our doorstep, and one of the most used parks in the National Park Service, and something that I enjoyed taking my dogs on.
And that's the thing about DC, the DC metro area, is it's so green. You know, because we didn't have the kind of industrial development that so many other big cities had, whether it be New York City, Philadelphia, Chicago. You know, you go to places like that, and oftentimes, you know, the rivers, particularly in like Philadelphia and New York, it's a totally different development profile.
Yes.
Right, because all those old industries were on the rivers, you know, for a variety of commercial reasons. And so they developed a different way, where here we just have all on the Potomac River, literally starting right outside the nation's capital. It just probably looks like it did when the first people came here.
Exactly. One of my fantasies is to see on the C&O Canal in your great district is to have those kinds of barges that they have in Europe, and be ferrying people down and have that canal actually operate in a way that it does in Europe, so that you really can have a great tourist destination, because it is so beautiful and as beautiful as anything in the world.
It really is. It really is. And all those little lock stations. You know, you can stay overnight in those places.
Yes.
I haven't done it, but I want to do it. And you know, I always say that, and then I never get around to it, that I'm going to plan a bike trip with my kids, and we're going to stay in those different lock stations, because they fixed up a whole bunch of them. Yes. And I've seen them, but I've never stayed in them. And they're really charming. So it's really great. So,
Congressman, I know that so much of your life has changed when you become a congressman, and you've got an 8-year-old.
I do.
Tell me, how do you do that? Because when I joined the county council, my kids were older, and it's hard, isn't it?
It is hard, yeah. So your 2 kids were...
They were older than that. They were like 12 and 15.
But they were still, those are...
Oh, no.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy.
You don't get those years back.
No.
You
so
know,
tell me how you do, how do you juggle all the responsibilities you have and the time commitments and keep sane and keep grounded and have a personal life that's fulfilling?
It's hard. I have 4 daughters, and when I first was elected, one was in college. Now 2 are in college, and one's out of college, but I still have 2 at home. And but I tell everyone, I feel really blessed to be able to do this job and live next to Washington, D.C. I think I'm the 2nd closest member of Congress to the Capitol. My house is about 12, 14 miles from the Capitol. So that
does Chris have you beat a little?
I think Chris and I are actually pretty close. You know, the Don Beyer, I think, in Virginia, because he's right in Old Town.
Yes.
So he can just zip over and get there. But Chris and I are pretty equidistant, you know, in terms of we're both kind of outside the Beltway.
Yeah, I feel for those people that, you know, California congressmen who Tuesday through Thursday they're here, and then they have to fly home. And
they, you know, and I think the public actually really gives my colleagues a hard time, because they make more of a sacrifice. About almost 100 of them sleep in their offices, you know, and which is probably very different than from when you were on the Hill.
Yes.
And they actually...
I slept in the office when I was there.
But yeah, but you know, but they came here and they stayed with their families, a lot of them. Now, I can count on 2 handfuls the number of members who have actually moved here with their families. So I feel very blessed, truly, to be able to do this job and go home every night and see my family and not have to do it. So it's tough. I mean, I used to travel a fair amount for business, and now I actually don't travel all that much. I'll travel when there's some kind of content or conference or something that I'm asked to speak at. But you know, my life now is entirely in Maryland, where when I was in the private sector, we had 20 offices around the country, so I was always moving around. So even though you're stretched a lot, and your weekends in particular, whereas I used to travel a lot but always have my weekends, now it's a little different. So I try to drop my youngest, who's 8, off at school every morning.
Good for you.
You know, which is a nice thing to do, because the Hill, as you know, doesn't start particularly early, because you got so many people from California. Right. So the Hill kind of really starts going at about 9 o'clock in terms of when all the things. So I used to be I used to be one of these people who get to work really early in the private sector. So now I'm actually home for breakfast and help get the kids off. So that's one of the nice things about it. But you know that you had it with your children.
I did.
I mean, those were prime ages.
Yes, and they actually didn't like parades so much.
Yeah.
You know?
Did you try to involve them in your work?
You know, but I also respected.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
That's the right answer.
This is my choice, not your choice. I'm not trying to
It's here
force
if you want it.
Right.
Yeah.
If it's something that you enjoy doing, you like being in the parade and throwing candy and waving, great. If not, okay. And
but actually, I suspect as they look back at it, they were very proud that you were doing public service.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah, I bet they were.
Hey, mister, down here. You illegally passed the stop school bus. I'm placing you in timeout. And this timeout means big fines, plus you really could have hurt somebody. That's why school buses are being equipped with video cameras to help kids like me stay safe. So respect the bus.
From Bassett's Restaurant in Poolesville, the conversation continues between Montgomery County Councilmember Roger Berliner and US Congressman John Delaney. They began this segment by sharing how each got their start.
One of the things that I really had not appreciated about your past is really your humble beginnings, because people know you as this extraordinarily successful businessman who really has done such great work in so many different spheres. But you grew up in a very working class environment. And talk a bit about that.
Yeah. Well, my dad was a construction worker. He was an electrician. And so I grew up in very much a blue-collar town in North Jersey, right, fairly close to New York City. If people know where Giant Stadium is, if you know where Giant Stadium is, right next there. And in the town I grew up in,
I hate the Giants.
Yeah, I was a huge Giants fan growing up. I shouldn't probably say that. But everyone in the town, you know, were either kind of laborers or carpenters or plumbers. It was really that kind of profile, and there was a lot of ethnicity to the town. They were Irish or English or German or Polish. And it was a real working class town. And my dad was an electrician. And, but my mother was really, she didn't go to college, neither of them went to college, but she had tremendous insights about the value of education. And so she pushed me relentlessly to get a good education. And it was my dad's union that actually, in part, paid for me to go to college.
Yes.
Yeah, which I still, you know, remember getting on stage. The business manager of the electrical union would make me come to their union hall in Jersey City, New Jersey, once a year, and to thank them for their scholarship. They would have a little thing every year that kids that got scholarships would come. And back then there were only men in the union, and the business manager says, you got to get on stage and thank the men. But I do remember, because you'd go up there and you'd look out at all these hardworking people, and you know that they were kind of doing something to give you an opportunity that none of them had.
Yes.
The thing that happened with me is it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do. So my mother wanted me to go to medical school, because again, in that generation, when they thought about their kids advancing, becoming a doctor was one of the things that really was kind of the American dream. Right? I was a pretty good student, so my mother said, you got to go to medical school. So I went to college, I went to Columbia, and I was studying to be a doctor, and midway through I realized I didn't want to go to medical school. But I had to tell them I was doing something, because they had made all these sacrifices, and I just didn't want to say, you know, I'm at this point in my life where I'm not sure what I want to do. I'm going to find myself. They didn't want to hear any of that stuff. So I said I'd go to law school, not because I wanted to go to law school, but because I needed to tell my parents I was going to do something after college. So I went to law school like a lot of people.
Yes.
You know, you're a lawyer. I don't know if when you went to law school, if you had this passion, you know, because I think you were at Dartmouth and then you went on to law school. I don't know if you knew you wanted to be a lawyer. I went to law school because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And while I was in law school at Georgetown here in DC, I was working at a small law firm that was 5 or 6 lawyers, but they also had a real estate development company. And they were doing a lot of historic kind of preservation and development in DC. And this was in the 80s. And I said, wow, that's really cool. Here's these lawyers, they have this business, that's what I want to do. So I graduated from law school and I went to work at a big law firm, and I thought I would go into the real estate business because that's the experience that I had. But I graduated law school in '88, and as you recall, the real estate market collapsed, right, around the S&L crisis. And it turned out to be a really good time to get into the real estate business, but you needed money, which I didn't have any. So a couple of law school classmates of mine who also wanted to be entrepreneurs, we said, well, what are we going to do? We thought maybe we'd get in the real estate business. There's not going to be any opportunity there. So we bought a business that was for sale in the Washington Post. It was a home health care business. In other words, sending nurses into people's homes. And it was incredibly small, and it was for sale for $15,000. And that was the important thing for us, right? We almost didn't care what the business, but each of us could scrounge together $5,000. And we bought the business. And so we bought a very small, called home health care agency. It had 6 nurses who were taking care of patients in the District of Columbia, mostly Medicare patients. And so we kind of rolled up our sleeves and we figured the business out, and we grew it over a couple of years, and then we sold it. But one of the things I learned from that experience is that small healthcare companies at the time were having a very hard time getting financing, because I couldn't get a bank loan to grow my business. And we had to use what are called factoring companies, which are kind of high interest rate lenders to finance our business. And I said, and this was around the time of the first Clinton administration, and they were, you know, talking about changing healthcare. So there was a real chill on the healthcare market among financial institutions. So I came up with the idea to start effectively a lender to focus on small to mid-sized healthcare companies and provide them financing so they could grow their business. And that's the business I started. And fortunately, it worked out.
Yeah, I'd say it kind of did.
Yeah, I ended up taking it public 3 years later, in 1996. I think I was the youngest CEO on the New York Stock Exchange. And I ran that business for 3 years, and then we sold it. And then I took a year off, and then I started another business, similar in theme, lending to small to mid-sized companies, because I've always thought small to mid-sized companies are underserved.
Yes.
Not really small businesses, because they're generally served pretty well by their local banks. But what happens is once they start growing, they kind of fall out of favor with the local banks because they're maybe growing too fast and a little too dynamic, but they're not ready for the bigger banks yet. So we thought there was an opportunity to build a specialty lending business focused on those companies. What we called them gazelles, fast-growing small businesses that were growing too fast for their local community banks to get comfortable with, but not big enough for the larger banks. And so we started a company called Capital Source, which lent to these kind of companies, but it was organized around industries. So we also had a healthcare business, we had a retail business, we had a technology business, we had a kind of a security defense contracting business. So our view was we could figure out these faster growing small companies because we had experts. But you were an entrepreneur also. That's something we have in common. So tell me about your business and what made you get into it.
I was, and I'm sure like you, every day you would wake up and you would go, oh, okay, how can I make something pop?
Right.
So, and also like you, I went to law school, and I went to law school after working on Capitol Hill and had a great victory on Capitol Hill and felt like, okay, this is the pinnacle moment, and what's going to happen? Am I going to spend the rest of my life on Capitol Hill? No. So I think, unlike.
So how many years were you on the Hill for?
I was on the Hill for 7 years.
Wow. I know you worked for Congressman Waxman.
I worked for Congressman Waxman. I was
very smart person.
I was a very smart person. I think if there's a Hall of Fame for congressmen, I think Henry Waxman belongs in the vote in the first year.
Yeah, I was so happy to overlap with him a little bit, so I got to know him a little bit.
He was quite extraordinary. In the majority or in the minority. No one knew how to make things happen better than Henry Waxman, even playing with a bad deck. And I was privileged to be Howard Metzenbaum's legislative director in the Senate. And Senator Metzenbaum would wake up every day and he'd say, Roger, what do you got for me? And I better have something for him. And he just loved being a senator. And so if I've picked up anything from my mentors in that way, it is really, you wake up every day and you go, okay, how can we make a difference today?
So those were the only two you worked?
No, actually I worked for a congressman from Cincinnati. Jerry Springer got me my first job. Yes.
Wow.
Because Jerry Springer was a superstar in Cincinnati politics.
Obviously, he was the mayor.
He was the mayor. And so at the height of Watergate, there was a special election in Cincinnati, and so it was a bellwether race, and I worked for the Democrat who was also former mayor, and he won, and he said, what am I going to do with you? I said, I want to go to Washington with you. And so I came to Washington. I worked for him. I worked for what was called the Democratic Study Group, which was the best training somebody could possibly have, because literally we wrote the analysis of legislation that that time members took to the floor with them.
Wow.
It was arguments for and against a bill.
Done by the Democratic Party.
Done by a group of, there were about 15 of us, that were a research arm for the moderates and liberal Democrats at the time of Tom Foley and Phil Burton and the big players.
So it was like Congressional Research Service for just the
Yes, and we were housed in the Cannon House office building, and
what a great way to cut your teeth.
Oh, it was terrific. So I enjoyed that time in my life tremendously, and then said, okay, I got to go to law school, figure out what else is going to happen to my life. And I'd been actually working for the California State Legislature, because I had been a political appointee in the Carter administration. And Reagan came in and they said, bye.
That's the
and
way
Henry
it works.
Waxman picked me up, and then this ally of his from California said, I need an energy person. Do you have anybody? And so I said, okay, I'll move out to Sacramento, work for the California State Legislature, went to law school at night.
And that's where you learned, that's where you got involved in energy policy, really?
Well, I'd been actually involved in energy policy on Capitol Hill.
Got it.
And then was the advisor to the California State Legislature on energy policy, and then got my law degree, and this former Kennedy staffer had this little business about energy. It was a newsletter to Canadian natural gas producers who had no clue what happened to their gas.
So a niche little newsletter.
Real niche. I represented the Canadian natural gas producers, the province of Alberta, the province of the British Columbia. At one point I actually even represented the Canadian federal government, and it was so much fun. And then I built a law firm around it and became their regulatory lawyer. And so it just was a fascinating time.
So what was the newsletter called?
Cross-Border Report.
And where was it based out of?
We based it in Washington, but we sold, it was basically a Canadian subscription. I'd go up to Calgary 4 times a year. I did seminars in Mexico City, and we had a North American natural gas kind of practice, and then I represented solar and geothermal and renewables of all sorts in the county of Los Angeles, fighting against utilities. And why the law firm stuff worked was because the clients felt I knew their business through the newsletter and the seminars.
You were not just an advocate.
I just wasn't
you
just
knew the subject matter.
And I knew context. And context obviously matters.
And you can actually tell a lot of young people to go into the energy business. I'm not sure what you think about that, because in my opinion, in 50 years, the way we, and you see it already, but the way we produce energy, the way we distribute energy, and the way we kind of use it will be so fundamentally different.
You're talking to somebody who's been preaching utility 2.0 for the past number of years.
So it just seems to me it would be, and you have a perspective on this obviously because you were in the business, it's a huge opportunity.
It really is.
Did it feel like that when you got started?
It felt like scary. I had a secretary. And it was just me and her, and putting out this newsletter, but really every day you woke up fired.
It's exhilarating,
Online registration is about to get easier at the county's Recreation Department and Montgomery Parks. Starting with fall registration, customers can find facilities and register for classes using one convenient system and one account. The new registration system, called Active Montgomery, will allow customers to use one website, one username, and one account to register for classes and programs, as well as view facility availability for reservations. Current and new customers will need to create a new account to reserve facilities and register for classes. Building a new account should only take a few minutes and will allow you to register and pay online for classes and facilities through one login. Signing up on the new Active Montgomery site is fast, secure, and easy. For more information, visit the Active Montgomery website.
For this final segment of No Boundaries from Bassett's Restaurant in Poolsville, Montgomery County Councilmember Roger Berliner asks US Congressman John Delaney about his strategies for finding common ground.
One of the things that I really most admire about you is your effort at searching for common ground. And once upon a time I had a TV show in Montgomery County called Search for Common Ground in Montgomery County, and it's not always easy.
No, it's not.
And in your world right now, oh my, I don't get how you can do it. But you've really come up with a number of initiatives that lend themselves to that approach. So talk to me about how you relate to that world you're in now and your infrastructure efforts, because we do need more infrastructure.
And you've been a big leader on this in Montgomery County, which I really appreciate, because it's easier to go to the Congress and advocate for infrastructure when your own home district has been really innovative and pioneering about it, which we have definitely been. I mean, what I've tried to do is have more of a best ideas approach. So I try to find what I think are the best policy ideas on the different areas that I care about, no matter where they may lie on the ideological spectrum, and try to pair them up. Because I think it's actually easier to get things done on a bipartisan basis if you avoid kind of mushy, I stand for nothing compromises, and more focus on finding best ideas that give each side a win.
Yes.
I think people feel better about that. And it's actually probably a better way to govern. So what we've done on infrastructure is Democrats, as you know, have been advocating for more infrastructure investing for a long period of time. And we've been 100% right about that.
Yes.
Right? Because it improves the lives of our citizens, as we know here in Montgomery County. It makes our businesses more competitive, and that's a really important thing for us to focus on in a global economy, a technology-enabled economy. How do we compete?
Yep.
And it creates jobs. And it creates really good middle-skilled jobs, exactly the kind of jobs we're missing. So the infrastructure argument is in my mind, unassailable.
Yes, compelling, and
That's
I mean,
right.
every day
That's right.
in our lives. I mean, you look at 270, for example. Okay, really, we can't do better than what we have there on 270, and that's just
which is why it's such a good
example.
investment.
Exactly.
So, so that's a pretty easy case. But the problem is, how do you pay for it? Right? We do have very high debt levels, not only in the federal government but a lot of state governments. And my Republican colleagues have been focused for a long time on fixing our broken international tax system, right, which is a system that encourages U.S. corporations to keep their earnings overseas. So right now, U.S. corporations have over $2 trillion of cash sitting overseas, which is about the same amount of cash they have in the United States. So for the first time in history, the U.S. companies have almost as much, if not more, cash overseas as they do in the United States. And they don't bring much of it back because they're effectively double taxed, which hurts companies who are doing business in real places with real tax codes, like Germany or Great Britain, and it encourages actually tax havens. So what we've wanted to do as part of our infrastructure bill, which is really a conservative idea, is to fix this system, right?
Yep.
Reward the companies that are actually doing business in real places where they're paying real levels of tax, allow them to bring their money back tax-free. But if they're in a tax haven, you put a minimum tax on it. So you don't encourage companies to go to these tax havens. And that's basically been a conservative idea for a long time. And so the nice thing about that fix is it generates revenues.
Right, you marry this conservative idea that generates revenue with this liberal idea that says this is where we need to spend it and maybe we can make something happen.
And the truth of the matter, if they're actually really good ideas, the other side's not opposed to it. So my Republican colleagues are not opposed to infrastructure at all. They actually think it's a proper role for the federal government to be involved. They don't think there's a proper role for the federal government to be involved in a lot of things Democrats wanted involved in, but infrastructure they do. Similarly, because the facts are pretty clear, similarly, if you go to Democrats on this international tax system and you talk about it, they want to fix it too. I mean, Democrats have lots of businesses in their districts that are great employers that are subject to this. Here in Montgomery County, you know, we have MedImmune, which is owned by AstraZeneca, which almost got taken over in one of these corporate inversions by Pfizer, because of this broken international tax system, right? So there was an example where in Montgomery County, right, which is obviously considered a very democratic place, we had one of our most prized employers almost leave us because of this broken international tax system. So you go to Democrats with this case and they agree with it too. So just like you've been pushing for a long period of time, you know, you try to find common ground based on finding good ideas, not by trying to convince people of stuff they don't agree. So you've been doing this longer than I have, so you understand what I'm saying.
I do, and finding common ground can often be very elusive because it does get so polarized.
It does.
And it's a question of, okay, how do we get past the polarization to be reasonable, responsible, and actually move us forward?
That's right. And you have to, I mean, one of the things I've always admired about the way you've approached public service is with a lot of respect, right? And you have to have that and humility. Because my view on this issue is this wouldn't be nearly as great of a country as it is today if half of the country was always wrong.
Right.
And if you listen to the two parties, they will try to convince you that the other half is entirely and utterly wrong.
Right.
And that's almost an insult to the country. Because how could we be this good if half the population was always wrong? So, like you have in your public service, which is why it's so great to have this opportunity to be with you here today, you approach it with humility and respect for your colleagues, which is why you're able to get things done. And if you bring that to a very partisan place like the Congress, it still works. I mean, Montgomery County is not as partisan, but your approach to governing is what I'm really trying to do, and it works in the Congress.
Well, it certainly worked with you, and you really are a great role model for a lot of people. And I think we're quite fortunate in Montgomery County to have you represent us, and I just know you're going to continue to do great work.
And I'm fortunate to represent Montgomery County, knowing that things are running so well at home with great leaders like you. So this was great fun. Thanks, Roger. Bye.